Check it out, a brand new podcast about the Seattle Mariners and a reaction to Dan Wilson's first series as manager coming up on Believe in Mariners. That's right. What is up, sports fans? What is up, Mariners fans? Welcome to a brand new venture from Believe Podcasts, a show called Believe in Mariners. I am going to be your leader on this journey, hopefully for a long, long time, and watching a lot of successful Seattle Mariners seasons. Definitely maybe a changeover from the past 20 years. And I say that because I am a diehard Mariners fan that knows exactly what you all have been experiencing because I have been with you. I'm Jordan Schultz. Welcome into Believe in Mariners. Believe, an amazing podcast company. So happy to be with them on this journey. Excited to get going. This show is going to be, I'm going to try to break it down for you a little bit and essentially tell you why I want to do this show to start off. And we'll get into some stuff as far as reacting to Dan Wilson's first series as Mariners manager after the firing of Scott Servais, a win over the San Francisco Giants 2-1 over the weekend, and then look forward to their continued stay at home against the Tampa Bay Rays coming up next and try to see if they really have a shot at the playoffs at this point. But essentially, a really, really awesome opportunity was presented to me by Believe to come on their network, do a podcast. I am out trying to find a former player as well. So actually, if you do know any former players, hit me up on Twitter at OnTheAirJordan. Or if you are a former Seattle Mariner and looking to get into media and do a media opportunity, this is going to be something perfect for you. I'm basically going to be here 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, breaking down everything on the latest news and happenings that's going on with the Seattle Mariners, as well as, kind of fun stuff that I like to talk about, the stuff that gets me amped up. And trust me, there's a lot of stuff that gets me amped up. I told the guys that Believe that I was perfect for this show because I, am a diehard Mariners fan. I've been a Mariners fan since I was a young kid. We're talking, I'd say probably 5 or 6. And then I got into them seriously when I was 10 years old, which was the 1999 season. Really remember, started to watch around then very, very frequently, like almost every day. So kind of a nice little run there that I, fell into as far as success goes, obviously leading up to that 2001 season, record setting 116 wins, but they had a wild card appearance before that. So they were good, and I was used to them being good. And then all of a sudden, the floor kind of got pulled out from under us after 2001, and y'all have been with me on that journey. And essentially, myself, as not only a fan, but a sports media member in the city of Portland, Oregon, felt like I had something to contribute, to this vast world of podcasts and content. We're going to be on YouTube, going to be trying to throw out content on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter as well. Very excited. Hopefully, we'll be able to do like a few live streams, reactions for games, and just kind of be my authentic self as a fan. I do want to plan this show. I'm going to structure it. We're going to be doing, like I said, 3 shows a week, trying to get you the latest happenings, like I said, on the Seattle Mariners, and really anything that you want to talk about as well, because I know I definitely have some ideas on like what this team needs to do better. They've been hitting terribly all season. Possibly going to set the record. I mean, they're running out of time to do that, hopefully, as well as make the playoffs. But hopefully they will not set the record for worst batting average of all time. I believe they would be breaking the record set by the 67 or 68 New York Yankees. And I say that as a Mariner fan who has put up with a lot of futility for a lot of years. I mean, I bring a lot of knowledge. I bring a lot of passion. And frankly, yeah, I'm going to bring some hot takes to this podcast, but I mean like deep Mariners knowledge, y'all. If you want to talk about like Roberto Pettigene making the opening day roster, we can do that one season. Remember Mike Sweeney making it with Ken Griffey Jr., his last couple of years in the league. Just so many fun, obscure things to talk about in Mariners history, like the 2 or 3 year run of the left-handed pitcher that had tattoos on his other arm, Joe Beimel, Scott Spezio's failed time with the Seattle Mariners, Jeff Cirillo getting bagged on for hitting 240 as a third baseman in the 2000s as a Seattle Mariners player. And in a different time, absolutely, now we'd be hoping we're praying for anybody to hit 240, but it's just so much fun to kind of go through trips down memory lane, and hopefully I can find a community of Seattle Mariners fans to do that with as well. So yeah, just kind of trying to get to why I'm here. I work at a sports radio station in Portland, 1080 The Fan. Really love being on there, talking, all kinds of sports, from Oregon Ducks football to Portland Trailblazers basketball, Seattle Seahawks football, and then, of course, all the national, stuff going on as well. Football-wise, I'm an LA Rams fan. But as far as sports go, I absolutely love baseball the most. Yeah, huge football fan, huge baseball fan, but I could sit down and watch Seattle Mariners baseball all year. In fact, sometimes I do. I kind of find myself in the months of December, January, February, just watching old games on YouTube. It's kind of sad. So, yeah, along with my huge diehard Mariners fandom, I mean, I bleed the teal, folks. I bleed it so much that I'd say 60 to 70% of my wardrobe is Mariners gear. Wearing Mariners stuff, if you can see it here on the YouTube screen for this episode. But I got my Mariners hat, my spring training, bright baby green. It's not the teal. It's the same color that all the Arizona teams did for spring training in 2024. Got that hat. Trust me, I'm the guy that has to I try to find deals, but has to always be getting the newest Mariners clothing and basically scrounging together whatever extra money I can to try and get anything that I see and I'm like, oh, immediately want to get my hands on. I'm just a sick Mariners fan. I think that that's okay. I think that it's healthy to support something. Everybody should have a passion for something. And one of my big passions, probably the biggest passion in my life outside of my wife and my family, is the Seattle Mariners. So stoked to be on with Believe. Appreciate everybody there. Cam and everybody else talking to me to bring me on. Really excited to get going with this show. So I think I can bring some knowledge to the table. I think, like I said, I'll bring some hot takes, and we're just going to have a lot of fun. This show, it's going to have a structure, but it's really going to be kind of the raw reacting Jordan Schultz, more affectionately known as Schultzy in the Portland, Oregon markets. If you want to call me Jordan, you want to call me Schultzy, you can call me either one. But know this, I am a diehard Mariners fan. I want them to win the World Series so bad. I want them to do whatever it takes. I want them to spend $600 million if they have to. I'm with y'all. I was pissed in the offseason at John Stanton. Please take this team to where it needs to be. I'm begging you, and I know that I'm not the only Mariners fan that's been screaming at you for the last 2 years to spend more money than you've been. I'm with y'all. I promise. I am probably one of the biggest Mariners fans that you could ever meet. I'd love to get into any conversations on the street regarding the Seattle Mariners with anybody. I'm just a freak like that. So, yeah, once again, appreciate the guys and gals of Believe for bringing me on. I feel like I'm the perfect person to do a podcast for Believe in Mariners. But all right, enough of the sappy stuff. Just kind of wanted to introduce myself. Thankfully, won't be talking, I think, that much about me and my history ever again on this podcast. If you're wondering, you can go listen to the beginning of this show, but we've got a lot to get to here in the next few minutes or so. A busy weekend. Of course, what a time to start a Seattle Mariners podcast, because, oh my goodness, I think one of the most historic firings, or the most historic firing in team history as far as managers go, happened last week. And if you've been living under a rock, you haven't heard by now, but I'm sure you have because you've been watching Mariners games with me. Scott Servais out. And that's right, beloved franchise catcher number 6, Danny Wilson, is in as the new skipper. And that was kind of a shocking move that we saw on Friday. Not necessarily, or I guess the announcement came Thursday, and then Dan Wilson talking to the media Friday, but not necessarily a shocking move to see Scott Servais fired by Jerry Depoto. I feel like Jerry Depoto's back is up against the wall. And frankly, I feel like this hire kind of even further proves Jerry Depoto being up against the wall. And I'll tell you why. It's because I think that this whole Dan Wilson plan, and I guess we really don't need to talk too much about Scott Servais and what what the process of his firing. I mean, I guess we can. I know that people are out there defending Servais and saying that it's not the manager's fault. I would say, well, managers do still make decisions in games. There was a game, a couple of weeks ago, where the Mariners had a chance to get a game-winning hit, and you put Mitch Garver, who's hitting less than 170 in. I get it. You're trying to build some confidence, but you can't give that situation to such a terrible hitter. Statistically, the worst hitter in Major League Baseball this year. So there are definitely some mismanagements, in-game situation type of things that I wasn't necessarily happy with Servais about. I kind of questioned sometimes when he would maybe go to a certain bullpen arm. I think he kind of came around. He and Jerry Depoto have always preached like pitching to a certain situation and using a guy, not necessarily as a closer, but like your best pitcher to face your best hitters. But I didn't feel like that always worked. And I do. It's like some games you really could have used Andre Munoz in the 8th. Some games you really could have used him in the 9th. And I kind of felt like that was a little bit backwards on Jerry Depoto and Scott Servais. And because I do, in my opinion, it was obvious to me that it wasn't just the coaching staff. It kind of sounds like, at least from reports that we've been hearing out of Seattle, that the front office and the coaching staff had kind of been working in tandem to kind of craft what the organization's approach would be. That was really something that Jerry Depoto was tasked with upon his hiring, as well as building up the minor league system. And obviously now we're there with Emerson and with, we've got basically 2 young pitchers that are still kind of, you would consider prospects, but basically major leaguers in Brian Wu and Emerson Hancock. You've also got a top overall prospect, Harry Ford. I mean, they are loaded. There's Lizardo Montes. There's so many guys down there that we have to talk about. Jerry Depoto's done that job very, very well. We know that. But as far as building up the culture, well, him and Servais and the coaching staff kind of did that together. And I think the locker room vibe was good, but not necessarily when you consider like the messaging as far as like hitters go. Reportedly seeing a couple of sources talking about like the rah-rah approach was just kind of the mentality for a bit, like hitting coaches basically telling these hitters that are struggling, hey, it's going to be all right. It's going to be okay. You're great. And that kind of coming from the top down, you kind of wonder like what the hell the actual message is. And so I do question some of the moves that Scott Servais made, but along with that, I do believe that him and Jerry Depoto were responsible for a good clubhouse culture, but not necessarily the best like decision-making culture on the field. And I know, once again, all the defenders of Scott Servais, there are a lot of people that really don't think the manager has anything to do with a baseball game being won or lost. Yes, the players play, they hit, and they strike out. And the pitchers are going to, they're going to strike out another hitter, not the pitching coach. However, it is the job of these coaches and of the manager to make decisions on who should be facing each other when. And I do think that Scott Servais failed at that sometimes. Is he a great person? Absolutely. Sounds like he was one of the best people ever to come through the Mariners organization, and I'm not challenging that. Unfortunately, the results were not there. And you look for the reasons why. You go to the performance on the field, which it's obvious. We've been talking about the strikeouts, a major league leading clip of strikeouts and a record-setting rate almost of strikeouts that the Mariners have been having. And then you talk about some of the in-game decisions. And yeah, the strikeouts aren't on Scott Servais, but overall, I do think that the culture needed to be changed. And we kind of knew that something was coming in that regard. Especially after the 1-8 road trip, because oh my goodness, I mean you can't in a freaking playoff race drop 8 games on the road, and a couple of those games which to really crappy teams, or a couple of those series to crappy teams. It's just not acceptable. And frankly, you understand, yeah, the vibe in the locker room is gone. And also, along with kind of concerns about Scott Servais, and to talk to those defenders saying, hey, like it's not Servais's fault. You do have to remember that ultimately, if he is not getting across to the players, a change needs to be made. And we've been hearing reports of that too. Once again, great dude. And he was great in his time here. And new manager Dan Wilson pointed that out in his opening press conference. But there was a need for change. And as far as the change, I actually really like it. I like it a lot after watching this first series against the Giants. And yet, Jerry Depoto, though, let's talk about really quickly before I move on to Dan Wilson, to kind of how I feel Jerry Depoto was forced into making this decision. And really, he's obviously, and we heard earlier, I believe it was with, I can't remember who said it on 710 ESPN Seattle, but somebody came on saying that Jerry Depoto and Scott Servais both had basically the final year on their contracts was this year, basically had the last year on their contracts that they were playing through, and then options for next season. So Jerry Depoto's back really up against the wall here. The performance is not anything that he thought it would be. Now, a lot of people have been screaming that he hired the wrong players in the first place. I would agree. I think the Luis Urias experiment was terrible. And now you're seeing Eugenio Suarez absolutely hitting out of his booty. I think he went 4 for 4 on Sunday this last weekend. And he's just showing, hey, this late season surge that he's having is just kind of making him look like the player he always has been. Yeah, he strikes out, but he produces. And that's one thing that you can do when you produce. You can strike out. That's okay if you're still hitting a ton of runs and if you're still knocking in a ton of RBIs. And yeah, Depoto kind of got hung up on the strikeout numbers with Teo and with Eugenio Suarez and decided to move on from them very stupidly, in my opinion, because then you had to go replace them with low-cost, mid-level guys that you were hoping that were going to have a resurgence, and then supplementing them with Mitch Garver. And even if Mitch Garver had a great season, up until the trade deadline, you were still a full-time hitter short. A platoon of Josh Rojas and Luis Arias was not supposed to be the future of the third base position. Josh Rojas was supposed to be coming in last season in that Paul Sewald trade and getting a look at second base, right? Getting a look. And now all of a sudden he's a decent hitter, but he's a major platoon part of the Seattle Mariners' plans. Is that a World Series caliber team? Jerry Depoto thinks so, and I think not. And I think those crappy offseason decisions with his hubris eventually forced him into making these deals at the trade deadline. He really, in my opinion, didn't make the trades for Arozarena and Justin Turner until he was forced to, until his ass was forced against the wall. Then he finally did it, acquired Jimmy Garcia as well. That hasn't worked out as well. JT Schwargois, that's worked out okay. But then you turn to the manager and yeah, your butt's up against the wall again, realizing you need a culture change. And in my opinion, this whole Dan Wilson hire and the nostalgic Edgar Martinez rehiring of hitting coach, which is awesome. That's great. He's one of the best hitters in baseball. He should be able to get his message across and actually hopefully clear up some of the cobwebs in these hitters' minds. But really, the nostalgic play by Jerry Depoto was like this massive, like, break in case of emergency kind of axe that Jerry Depoto had sitting in like that glass case outside of his office on the corner of Edgar and Dave, right? Jerry Depoto had this nostalgia plan in his back pocket. And I got to say, you know what? He's a smart guy. I don't necessarily agree with like his decisions on player personnel, but to get to the point of being a general manager in baseball, you have to be a smart person. He is, to his credit. There are some people that don't like this move, bringing in Dan Wilson. But there's a lot of people that, of course, you're tugging at the heartstrings, like me. It sucks. I admit it. I'm definitely a little biased because I feel like my old Mariners teal brain is coming through here. The nostalgia is coming through. The bias is coming through. My love for the team is coming through, as opposed to objectivity. And a lot of people were asking objectively last week, hey, why was Dan Wilson brought in without an interim tag? Because, yes, Dan Wilson is officially the next manager of the Seattle Mariners, not the interim, but he is the full-time guy, according to general manager Jerry Depoto. And that is a pretty interesting move. You make a move to fire your manager in August. That's obviously not a time where you can really interview anybody. And Jerry Depoto said that in his comments about why he decided to make Dan Wilson a full-time manager instead of an interim. But also adding to that, he didn't think that anybody under the interim tag has a very good shot to succeed, which, I mean, I think that's fair. But when you're talking about a franchise legend, if you're going to make the decision to hire him, you have to. I don't think you can give him the interim tag. I think, and it sounds like Dan wanted the job. It sounds like he's wanted this opportunity for a bit. You have to go all in here. And in my opinion, I think that him going all in, Jerry Depoto going all in on Dan Wilson, instead of waiting to interview like a Joe Madden in the offseason, waiting to interview. And Joe Madden's 70. Is he really going to be able to come in and change the culture in Seattle? I don't know. I love Joe Madden as a manager, but he was also a really good manager in the days when like pitchers were still hitting and he was able to do double switches and really messed around with the lineups. But obviously, you know, was really good in Tampa Bay and won the Cubs their first World Series as well. Has the game passed him by? I'm not sure. But looking down the list of candidates of managers, in my opinion, I kind of understand why Jerry Depoto didn't actually want to make a move now. There's really a bunch of young guys. There's a Dodgers first base coach, McCullough, that was interviewed last year. There's a few other guys that kind of pop up. in baseball over the last few years. I know Joe Espada has kind of been in the conversations for other jobs until Dusty Baker had retired. I think he got like Gabe Kapler, who is unemployed still after being fired by the San Francisco Giants. Does Don Mattingly, does that, would he come in and be able to change the culture in Seattle and lead you to World Series? I don't know. None of those names really ruffle my skirt. So I guess kind of sitting back and looking at that, I understand why Jerry Depoto did what he did to hire Dan Wilson as a full-time manager rather than wait, because there's really nobody on the horizon, at least that I see, that I think could come in and give this Mariners team what they need. What they need is somebody who's familiar with these guys. That's Dan Wilson. Somebody that understands the culture of this team and what's been built already. That's Dan Wilson. Somebody who has worked with the coaches, worked with the players, worked with the front office, worked with, almost everybody in such a personal, close capacity that it's almost an easy transition. I'm not saying it's easy when anybody gets fired and like you get a new boss, but it's an easier transition for those guys when you've got somebody that you've already worked with. And when JP Crawford's having to switch and talk to Dan Wilson instead of Scott Servais, it's easy instead of having to switch from Scott Servais to Joe Madden, who hasn't been in the organization. I think it sets him up for success. And especially after the first series, a win over the San Francisco Giants, I definitely think that I'm all for Danny Wilson as the Mariners skipper going forward. I'm so excited to see the heights that he can lead them to, the attitude, the smiles. He kind of reminds me like a little bit more of like my demeanor, just a lot more easily excitable. And it was just so cool to like see him, on Friday night after the win, banging up against Julio after that comeback, and just so stoked to be there. So excited to get that win and prove like, hey, this is a team that can actually do something. The joy that was felt by everyone on that Friday night, I don't think it had been felt by anybody all season. And I think that is because Dan Wilson is now the manager and setting the tone for the emotions in that clubhouse. So love the Dan Wilson hire. Super excited. Unfortunately, though, with the win against the San Francisco Giants on Sunday and Friday, winning the series 2-1 up at T-Mobile Park, unfortunately, the Houston Astros were able to get a win as well. So the Mariners were hoping to go into the week 3.5 games back of the Astros, but unfortunately, they had to go into the week 5.5 games back of the Astros. What do you do at this point with 30 games remaining? Well, you got to win, and hope the Astros lose. And really, if you could get a little lucky and have the Astros losses line up with your wins more often than not, well, then that's going to be in your favor, obviously. But the Mariners do, in my opinion, have a pretty easy schedule. I actually think they have one of the easiest schedules in baseball for the rest of the season. But their hitters just have still been pretty inconsistent. And I don't like to use the word inconsistent. When you talk about consistency in sports, it's usually regarding like players being good. And that's what they're paid to do, right? But I don't feel like there's really any other word I can describe the Mariners hitters as is inconsistent. They've just been bad. They'll hit one night and then they won't hit the next night. And their offense has been there at some points. I mean, their averages suck, but they've scored 10 or more runs in different stretches of really crappy play, but still managed to like throw some runs up on the board even through that. And somehow, some way in the first half of the season, guys were always getting their hits exactly when they needed and playing kind of chaos ball. But now going forward, I mean, you've got basically now 30 games to play your best baseball ever. And you've got easy teams, in my opinion, to do it against with the Rays in town right now. You've got the Angels. You've got the Padres, which are probably one of the harder teams, as well as the Astros and Yankees. I think outside of those, you got the Athletics for 7. So you can take care of business there. You've got the Rangers for 7. So you can take care of some business there. Like, there's actually light. I see some light at the end of the tunnel, but they've got to do more than hit 250. They've got to do more than have stretches, of 20 games with one home run like Julio Rodriguez has been dealing with earlier in the season. Thankfully, he is now hitting. I think most of these guys have started to pick it up, like Luke Raley, finally turning it around. It looks like in the last 30 days or so, he's hitting like 270. It would really be nice to see the new acquisitions of Arozarena and Justin Turner heat up as well. And frankly, the Mariners aren't going to make the playoffs if those guys don't hit. They're going to get JP Crawford back. I saw a report earlier this week from Mike Curto that I believe he had a rehab start on Sunday of this last weekend for the Mariners. 0 for 3, and then did not get a ball hit to him at shortstop. So unfortunately, no chance for him to at least show off some of that defense. But JP down rehabbing at Tacoma. They're going to get him back soon. But really, the ultimate question is, will all of that be enough? Because he was a pretty bad hitter before he went down on the DL or on the IL, excuse me. You're just kind of hoping that he can be an average hitter when he gets back. Frankly, if some of these guys were just average hitters, the Mariners probably would be a playoff team. And I think that's why people are so pissed. I get it. All right, I think that's going to do it. I think that's going to wrap up this first episode of Believe in Mariners. Like I said, we'll be doing an episode every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the Major League Baseball season, and we're going to do a lot of interviews. We're going to check in, try to get some people directly out of Seattle, as well as some national baseball pundits on the show talking Seattle Mariners. Hoping, really efforting and working hard to get a former Mariners player to co-host this show with me. I think that's going to really increase the quality of this. And frankly, it's just going to be more fun hearing, not just from some chubby Mariners fan that likes to wear teal all the time, but hearing from me, asking the questions that you all want to know of somebody that's actually been doing this, a former Major League Baseball player, and has experience in those moments that we all want to know so much about. But thanks again to Believe for letting me do this. Excited to see where this show takes us all. And hopefully, maybe starting this show can get some good vibes going for the Seattle Mariners in the last 30 games of the season. Keep those tridents up, Mariners fans, and stay safe out there. See you later.